Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Joining me today for our ongoing Revolution Through Music series is Gene Owens of Faithless, a band that I'm very, very fond of, really for multiple reasons, because they're amazingly talented, but somebody who has shown themselves throughout a lot of the things that we've seen, politically and otherwise. But COVID-19 was a really obvious moment where people chose to put what they believed ahead of a lot of different things. In this case, a career, a prospering career in the music industry, and to do so because you believe in it, because it's something that you think is important, and to see, a divide in the community about people that will support you based on what they believe in, what they think you're fighting for, and that the music is fantastic, versus those that will ignore everything else for a political agenda. And this series is important to me because it really discusses, as we've discussed, whether it's comedy or music, a way that people can be reached through music that they may not realize with things that are important. And we know that happens with propaganda every single day. And so inviting Gene on to discuss this work, this field and his music through that, and what he's discovered and how he's got here. So how are you today, brother? Good to have you on the show.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Ryan. I've been a big fan of the show for years now and following your work, so it's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, and likewise, I really do think that your band really stood out to me in a lot of this. Like I said, choosing to do this because you believe in it. And in my opinion, in no way whatsoever diminishing your work, in fact, making it much better. But at the same time, like I said, people that would choose to ignore it just because of a message that's in there, it's such an interesting overlap. But so let's start with, your background in all of this. When did you first get into music? Were there any kind of like early, any groups that kind of, guided you toward it? And at what point did you kind of start to overlap with this discussion?
Sure. I discovered music at a young age. My parents would always, my dad was a big Elvis fan and Sinatra fan, and my mom loved Motown. And that's the music I grew up with, was the oldie station. So it was like the Supremes and, uh, you know, um, Marvin Gaye and that kind of stuff, and the Temptations and Elvis and the Beach Boys and the Beatles. And that's when I was first exposed to music. And those were the first sounds that entered my mind and formed the concept of what is music to me. And then when I was about 13, my father passed away, and it was a very heartbreaking moment for me as a young man. And it was at that point I rediscovered music, and music kind of became this very cathartic thing for me, where I could put all my emotions and my angst and my rage that I felt into music, to channel it into something productive and cathartic. And in a lot of ways, I mean, I feel like rock and roll really saved my life. It really got me through a very difficult time in my teenage years. And it gave me purpose and a way to channel all those emotions. And I think that's the beauty of music. It can really get you through hard times. And I think it has really this power to unite people, this power to kind of save people in a way. So, right out of high school, I went to a music school called the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles. It's right in the heart of Hollywood. It was a big like guitar shredder school. In the 80s, I think Eddie Van Halen actually sat on the board of directors.
Nice.
So I was a little out of place because I was always focused on and interested in songwriting. And most of the guys there just wanted to like see how they could do like super fast tapping and Yngwie Malmsteen kind of stuff. But I did learn a lot, and I met a lot of great musicians and got to collaborate with them and kind of put together my first bands there in the late 90s, early 2000s in Los Angeles. And from there, I relocated to Atlanta in like 2005, and then I shortly thereafter formed Faithless, and that's just kind of become the moniker of my musical endeavors. So now we have 3 full-length albums and a series of singles, including that one you were kind enough to open the show with, "Stand Together," which we released last year.
And we'll be ending with the full version of that, just to give you a little taste to start, because it's, really just the showing you the political kind of, messaging behind it. So before I want to ask, I don't know if you want to speak for the remaining band members, but we can get into what, your impression of that same conversation for them. But first, just the name. So Faithless Town, was that something that, explain where that name came from? And was that because of this mindset, or was that before you were, or was it always there for you? Kind of like the, truth through music kind of mindset.
No, the name just kind of came by chance. We were originally called the Easy Hearts, and it was a very Americana, um, lineup of the band, we had a fiddle player, and it was very acoustic, very Graham Parsons alt country style music.
I love it.
And yeah, man, we did an EP back in 2008 with that kind of sound, 5 songs.
You got to give me that
But yeah,
afterward.
I'll send it your way.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things as you look back on older records, you're like, I wish I could have done this differently or sang that
Mhm.
differently. But it still has a special place in my heart. But as we were making that album, I realized that there was a band in the Netherlands that had that name, the Easy Hearts, and then
Mhm.
we were kind of stuck with like we're about to finish this record and we don't have a name for the music for the group for the band. So we had a song called Faithless Town, and that we took the name for the band from that song. And I thought in about it more. I personally am agnostic. My heart is open to faith and religion, but I'm a skeptic at heart, and I think that's why your work has always resonated with me. And the tagline of TLAV of question everything. So there might be an element of that where like I'm still just kind of undecided, and I find it hard to put my faith into things that I can't see with my own eyes and believe. But um, yeah, but really, it was just by chance that
Mhm.
name kind of became the name of the band and my musical endeavors.
I sense that you were kind of hinting around there that like, so has the name become more meaningful for you now? Because before you answer, similar thing with my name is that it kind of came about in a kind of a chance way. Like there was feeling behind it, but I didn't really contextualize it the way that I see it now. And people always ask me, what does it mean to you now? And it's really, for me, it's become like the ending pursuit of truth. The last American Vagabond is, it's like Vagabond is not always, it means, endless travel, not necessarily for the end result, but just the travel itself. And I kind of relate that to that today, but that's not how I saw it at the beginning. So is there something like that for you with the name today as it pertains to what's
Yeah,
going on?
I would say so for sure. It's kind of like band names are really unique things, or the name of any kind of creative endeavor. It seems silly at first. Like every name that you think is cool of any band, whether it's the Black Crows or the Wallflowers or the Heartbreakers, everything you just by itself, it sounds kind of silly. But once it's like it has life, once the music
Mhm.
becomes a part of that brand or that entity, then it takes on meaning. But yeah, it's an ever changing thing, and the songs that I write, I think they're living things, and that's why love to bring them to life on stage, and the name of the band and the music and the songs. It's just a constantly evolving, living organism of sorts.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting, like you're saying with music, or songs in particular, that, a song could come out. Same actually. No, I think you and I actually talked about this when I performed with you guys at the Cobra, that the songs I wrote these, I don't know, some of them, almost a decade ago. And to think about how relevant these songs are to like literally what's happening, because, the sentiment is kind of ageless, but it takes on new meaning when you start to go, okay, like with COVID-19 and these things, it starts to make more sense. So I totally get that. It's interesting how you're right. It's sort of a living thing that can evolve as things go along. Did you want to touch on, any of the other band members, at least, what are their names and, does it all start the same? Has that evolved over time?
The
The
lineup
members?
of the band has changed like
Mhm.
countless times. It's really hard to keep a band together.
Yeah.
Everybody has got their own lives, and it's hard to just be making original music. I mean, anybody
Mhm.
can do it now, and everything is oversaturated with people making TikToks and recording things on their computer and their phones, and which is great. The advancements in technology in that sense and social media have allowed people to create easier, without having like $20,000 to go into a recording studio. But at the same time, everyone's just so busy, and it's very hard to make money and make a living as just playing original music. So, I mean, most of the guys in my band right now, they're since I'm in Nashville, they're Nashville players. I have a really talented backing vocalist, Mariah Morse, who plays around town all the time. Our guitar player, Nigel Briggs, he's originally from Canada, and but now he's one of the hardest working guitar players and bassist in Nashville. But yeah, the whole band lineup just kind of is a revolving door of sorts. Like I think of it like one of my favorite bands is Guided by Voices. They're this indie rock band from Dayton, Ohio, and the band has gone through probably 50 members or more throughout
Mhm.
since its inception. and the one main factor is Robert Pollard, the singer songwriter. So Faithless Town is kind of like that. And I can't say that every person that I've played music with that has shared the stage with me as part of Faithless Town shares my views, you know, and that we're completely aligned on everything. And I don't think we need to be, you know, I would really like us all to get back as a society to a place where we can collaborate with others, work with others that we disagree with, that we don't have to be completely aligned with on every political or social issue. That's like what a civilization is supposed to be, a civilized, polite society. This nonsense of like, I have to be completely in agreement with somebody on every political thing for us to be friends, for us to work together. I think that's nonsense.
I agree completely. And I think that's one of the biggest detriments to it. It really wasn't just this moment. It's been a building issue, but I think we really saw this with the introduction of the Trump dynamic. And I don't even think it's about him. I just think it's how it's all being used, which we all saw this change from, we disagree to you're now an enemy of the country. And that's all it is right now. If you like you're saying, you can't have an amicable disagreement. If you think that, then you're trying to kill us all, or you're going to destroy the country, or, it's all hyperbolic. And so you're right. We need to be able to get beyond disagreement and understand that we can work together towards different change. It's I think one of the reasons we are where we are right now. And I think that's by design. We can get into some, current events toward the end of the show. I think it's important because a lot of that is all in that same conversation. But you mentioned something about TikTok before we go back to that. I thought this was an interesting point that, in regard to the way the industry has changed, and you've been doing this a while, right? You saw the change of where basically where in Nashville in particular, I forget how long you've been here, but where there at the time there was an industry kind of control over how you can get you had to pay a lot to go to these studios, and you wouldn't be able to produce to a certain level if you weren't able to do that through connections to the money. And it sort of created like a box out of a lot of people that were talented, until eventually we saw the shift into something like that where people could do in-home stuff, or more so it became, somebody I work with in Nashville exactly who has done this in a mainstream field has broken off and started his own home studio. And so that really did change the field a bit. And so there's like a middle ground there to now where it's like this oversaturation with people on just easy computer stuff on TikTok. So all that kind of transition, it's weird to see though. Wasn't there a moment there where it was kind of like a liberating time, right? Where it was kind of like you were unbound by the kind of industry control over it. Am I wrong in that? Is that how it felt? And then now it's getting worse because it's oversaturated?
Yeah. And I think I think there was that moment. I think you probably saw that in independent journalism, right? And
Same kind of thing.
Also like people like James Corbett, seeing like his YouTube kind of blow up, get hundreds and thousands of subscribers in this very organic way, where people seeking out the truth or seeking out alternative voices in journalism and media. And I think similarly, something was happening with music and art. But now we're at the point where not only is it like it's oversaturated, but I think that it's controlled. I think we know that like platforms like TikTok, YouTube, they will censor you. We have a song called Do Not Comply that is still completely banned off YouTube. It was up there for a few days, and we got a strike on our account. They pulled the video down. It's on Rumble. It's Rumble and X are about the only places you can watch it. But we know that those platforms are controlled, are censored, and they're gamed. So I'm very skeptical now when you see anybody that emerges as this viral sensation. I guarantee you that there is the same way that the industry was controlled before by big record labels and like Sony and Universal, and the same way these platforms are being controlled now. When there's an artist that all of a sudden is being promoted to you on every platform, like for me, and I know people will disagree with this, but for me, a perfect example of this is Oliver Anthony. I know
I was just thinking that, yeah,
primed as like he's the voice of the people. Okay, first of all, that song is about, he mentions people eating cookies. No great song is about cookies. I include Limp Bizkit in that too. And then two, it was just like an anthem of victim consciousness. And of course, it's promoted on everything. I open up TikTok, it's him singing that song. You open up YouTube, it's him singing on it. Instagram, Facebook. The Republican National Convention, the debates were happening. It was the first question they asked the candidates. What do you think about his new song? People think that's really organic in this day and age. I mean, it's wild.
But let me ask you something though. Do you, I mean, obviously it's all opinion because we can't, prove one way or the other, but I agree with you. I don't find that even being possible. I shouldn't say it like that. It's certainly possible, but highly unlikely that that was organic. My question is, do you think it's possible that people like that in a general sense could be used without being a part of that manipulation?
Yeah, I think so.
Song that they decide to capitalize on as opposed to him being a part of that lie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. There's so much. I mean, the whole industry it's just fake, and
Exactly.
it's broken. Like the streaming model's completely broken, talking about the oversaturation and how the digitization, that's a hard word, but how digital everything has become, and people making music digitally and sharing it digitally. Everything's just so fake and gamed, and it's really incredibly more difficult, I think, than ever before for musicians to make money. Case in point, I have a friend here in Nashville who had a song of hers just hit 1 million streams on Spotify.
Wow.
She owns, she's part of a duo. So it's her and her songwriting partner. They own the master. They own their publishing. They have all the rights to it. It got 1 million streams on Spotify. That only earned them collectively $3,000. They split that. That's $1,500 each. That does not even, $1,500 doesn't even cover 1 month of an average 1-bedroom apartment in Nashville.
That's insane.
So it's wild. Like, thinking about what success is in this industry now, you kind of really have to think outside of that. I think.
Sorry, no, go ahead. I'll come.
Yeah, I just think what's important is like being true to yourself, making the art you feel compelled to make, right? Like I don't think anybody chooses the path of being an artist, like actually an artist that's creating art that sometimes has inconvenient truths in it. Sometimes it has things that rile people up, that people disagree with. No one's going to really do that unless they feel like called to do it. And because it's not about just making money. The people that are going to make the money, they've been like groomed since childhood. You see all these Disney stars, the Britney Spears, the Ariana Grandes, the Sabrina Carpenters, these people that were, child stars, and they've been kind of groomed through the industry the whole way to be this pop star. And Taylor Swift's another example. She was the daughter of one of the richest men in Pennsylvania. He's spent a small fortune building her career and positioning her in line with all these corporate interests, so she could just be this mouthpiece that she is, this big, face of this corporate entity.
Yeah, redefining success is something I think is a really important thing you touched on right there that I've talked about in this field and any of it, but from my perspective as well for a long time, that we need to start recalibrating how we think this looks. Otherwise, we're going to be let down. Like, I think, that like in this sense, like from my perspective, it's like, I don't think we're going to have this watershed moment where it's like, we won. You know what I mean? Like suddenly everybody sees it's over. Like, I don't even think that's possible with where we are today, but we still have success in a lot of ways. And so it's about trying to redefine what that looks like. And the same thing from your perspective. It's like, so, it's so frustrating for that to even be possible, that somebody could reach 1 million people. What are we even calling viral? People call things like so many thousand shares viral today. Think about 1 million and having no real return on that, which shows you how much they've kind of captured that market to where, the only way you can get that reach without going through other channels is do that, but then you get no return for it. And it's like, so how do we then find a way to capitalize on that? That's the hard part, without selling your soul to all these different control factors. It's so frustrating. I deal with a similar thing where, from my perspective, at the very least, we interview the same people you're going to find half the times, like during COVID and others, then you'll see on the highest levels of the conversation. We've got videos that get over 1 million views more than once in the past, but yet we are shockingly suppressed and restrained to where we don't really see the return from the work. And it's the same conversation, and so it's like, how do we get past that? And it's it's a rhetorical question. I don't really know at this point, but that's my point about trying to redefine how we think the end game is. And that's where it becomes almost like, by default, selfless. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's like, okay, well, screw that then. I'm not going to even worry about it as much, insofar as so much as I can, bills and everything. I'm just going to focus on what the outcome is, what we can do to change this, which is why I respect what you're doing and plenty of others in that field, is that it becomes about the resilience. Like, screw it. I'm just not going to give up, and it's like, that's why I think it's so important what you're doing in all this, Any comment on that before I ask the next question, since I rambled there for 2 minutes?
No, you're all good, man. Well, thank you for the compliment. And I think the solution is to build community, and for that community that you connect with to support you, as either
Hmm.
that supporting the independent journalist like yourself or supporting the musician, artist, myself. That's the only way that we kind of keep the thing going and get the return on it. And that's for a musician, it's buying physical media, for I think for supporting independent journalists like yourself, it's like making a donation through all the various ways they can do that through your
Hmm.
website. Um, so yeah, getting back to buying physical media, even just buying digital downloads, just stop streaming. If you
Mm.
really like an artist, especially a more independent artist, and maybe somebody that is a little more controversial or somebody that is going to face some kind of suppression or censorship, that go out of your way to support them, donate to them. Most of those people have some kind of give send go or buy me a
Mm.
coffee or PayPal that you can just give artist contributions to. They also, like ourselves, we sell CDs through our website faithlesstown.com, merch, buy t-shirts. Like one sell of a t-shirt is worth 3,000 streams on
Hmm.
Spotify. These people that own these streaming platforms, they have figured out the way to completely exploit the artist and convince people that music should be free and easily accessible to them at all times
Right.
without adequately compensating the artist. So I think that's the way to do it, and go out to shows. Like get out of your house, go out, see a concert, see the
Right.
band, buy some merch, tip them, get back to like real life, real physical things. Get out of like the internet of things, that
Right.
they want to push us to.
It's such a hard thing to sell people on it's such obvious logic. I mean, even people that would then retort with how convenient it is or why they need it for their job likely still have some inkling of the same feeling. Like it's actually shocking to me how prevalent that idea is that everything. I mean, touch on some of these things as like RFK Jr. discussing the idea of wearables, which is happening right now and all through Twitter. It's like I feel like everybody's pushing back on this stuff, and yet it continues. And it shows you that we are being kind of trapped in this convenience security kind of dynamic. What was this the quote that if those who would give up liberty for a little security deserve neither. It's like that's the kind of where we are right now. And so that is such a confining thing. And so how do we get past that though? Because people now have been driven into iPods and iPhones and iPod like it even exists anymore, but anything like that, where then they have to use this. So they go buy a CD player or a CD or something like that. They have nothing to play it on anymore. It's like, what would your advice for this point, this comment, this part of this conversation for those that want to go in that direction? Are there any groups out there they could follow or websites they could look to? Like, what would be your advice for those people?
I think, just buy a good turntable,
There you
and
go.
and
There
start
you go.
investing in vinyl, or
Yeah.
even buy a CD player. You can still buy them; they still make them, and start building a collection. Because the thing too of having everything in the cloud or everything on some subscription service that
Doesn't
can be
exist.
terminated, it's always
Yeah.
you're basically giving your control over to some outside entity that at any point can just cut off your access to it,
Right.
right? So it's like at any point you can, if you have so many things down, on your Amazon that to your Kindle. I think that's how it works. I don't know, I still read like physical tactile books,
I
but like
can't
at
even
one
do
point they
Kindle.
could just cut off your library, right? So you
Right.
lost all your hundreds of books. Now if you have hundreds of books that you can read at any time, you can take with you no matter where you are. If you're out in the woods camping or you're in your living room, they can't do that. And the same thing
Mhm.
with your music collection. Don't let it all, just don't surrender your control and your power to somebody else, especially
Yeah.
some douchebag that like the guy that owns the CEO of Spotify, that Swedish dude that looks like a troll, like a legitimate troll.
Right.
Um,
Who has
yeah.
censored both of us, if I'm correct, right? You were censored on there as well, right?
Was it? I haven't been censored on
Oh, I thought you were. Yeah.
on Spotify. Did I say Spotify?
No,
Uh,
I'm just remembering. I thought that was, but
Not on Spotify.
Spotify is one of
Just
the culprits. Myself, I was censored there. A lot of people were. So to make the point, they're definitely censor happy on that platform.
yeah, I've seen, even I think like people, even like leftists. Like there's this songwriter that I followed for a while, David Rovix, who is very
Right.
vocal again, in support of Palestine, and they've censored his work.
Yep.
To my
That's
understanding,
the
both.
that's the new COVID focused censorship dynamic right now. It's like it always just kind of fluctuates on what you're not supposed to talk about. Yeah. Well, I want to actually touch on a bunch of those things. Before we get there, I wanted to ask you about um, a general thing about the industry, right? So because you've gone through this from a point where, like you're saying, like, I mean, in a general sense, you didn't start with this mind focus or this focus about, informing people about something like unpopular truths. And over the time, you got into that, and it has affected your career in a large way, right?
I think I've always admired songwriters like John Lennon and Bob Dylan and people that were tackling social issues and political issues. So, I think through my whole life, I've kind of written those types of songs, but, it was never really an issue. And I think a lot of times I was probably on the side of what I guess the left would have been on the side of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that was like being anti-war, which the left was for a long time until the last few years, before Ukraine, the left usually was the side of the anti-war. They were against the war in Iraq, against the war in Afghanistan.
Or they said
I
as
was,
much.
yeah, and I guess I was aligned with those things and it was
Mm-hmm.
fine. But, you know, now during COVID, we really saw like the peak division and we saw like the
Right.
peak censorship, and they made it so they pitted people against each other where not only like you were saying earlier, like you're a bad person if you hold this view, if you question the official narrative coming out of the CDC and the NIH and the government, then you are a bad person and you're a grandma killer, you're
Mm-hmm.
evil. You had people like Noam Chomsky saying with the unvaccinated should just be like separated and put in camps. We'll figure out a way to get food to them.
Wild.
So I think it was just a sign of how polarized things became.
Mm-hmm.
Got that the things I was saying were all of a sudden like so controversial. I don't really think
That's interesting.
anything that I've ever like stood for ever, like my position really hasn't changed. It's just the
Right.
world around me has changed. Like I've never trusted the government. I've never supported war. I would never support like the forcefully like vaccinating people against their will, cutting people out of society because of their medical choices. Um, you know, uh, intruding upon women's only spaces and women's sports, like all these things. My position has stayed the same. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like this agenda that they've been pushing to us through mainstream culture has changed, and now I'm at odds with it. A lot of my positions are at odds with it.
And this is what I was kind of getting at. So it's interesting. So you have generally been saying and pushing back, and that at some point how they dealt with that change. And I do agree, like it just became over the top. And it's always been there, as a lot of us noticed on YouTube. And there was a time when people thought you were a lunatic for claiming YouTube censored you. And now we all accept that was always been going on. But so that point, that time frame after COVID, things got a little more intense. So I want your thought on this in your experience. To what degree before that do you, and it's your opinion, do you think that the music industry, will kind of like choose not to sing what's in their heart for what they think will be more marketable? And then do you think that changed any noticeable way after COVID, one way or the other?
I think, yeah, I think since like the early 2000s, everything's just become so like corporate and controlled. And I think getting back to how streaming has really decimated the revenue for artists and kind of redefined and reimagined what the music industry is. I think
Everything.
the labels and they saw like we can't really take risks, but like we used to. Like in the 90s, a label would sign like 100 bands in a year or more, and if one or two of those bands became a success, then it all worked out. If they had
Mm-hmm.
one Nirvana, it made every other little band that they signed, every Superchunk or every Magnapop or every other little band, that was like kind of doing their thing and had some
Mm-hmm.
tour support and they were putting out records and they were still getting to go to a studio, but they weren't like the success of Nirvana or Alice in Chains or Soundgarden. It still made it worthwhile and profitable for the labels because people were buying music. So I think at some point when
Interesting.
Napster happened and the streaming model took over, but really piracy before the streaming model, where people were
Mm-hmm.
just pirating music. And, I think the labels were like, we can't take risks on this anymore. We can't
Right.
just like give money to artists. We need to have something that we completely can control, that's formulaic, that's packaged, that's branded, that is this whole like kind of PR creation. And that's when
Artificial.
we start, yeah. And then we started seeing all the boy bands and
Yes,
the
right.
Christina Aguilera's, and then that became the Taylor Swifts, and then it became the Katy Perry's, and then it became
Right.
all this garbage that we have now, whether it's the bro country or it's the horrible pop music, or it's even the things that they're trying to push to us as like, this is the blue collar counterculture message that no people that we've never heard of, that all even fake truthers, I swear, like
Right.
this one girl that was getting promoted by everybody like 6 months ago that literally was a doctor pushing all the COVID stuff. And
Right.
now she's like calling out the scamdemic and considering herself a truther, and they're playing her on InfoWars. It's like
Right.
everything, it's all fake.
Right. Well, I'm of the mind that most people are seeing this. That's my personal opinion. Whether they choose to speak out or they still side with their certain side, I just think it's becoming shockingly obvious. And that's there's this whole kind of fake element to it, and that's the mainstream alternative media to all of this. Where it's in everything, and I think in every facet of our lives, where you've got like this secondary shelf of like, it's like there's the reality, and then there's like this fake half version of everything. And I think that's like the media, that's the musicians, that's the media, and that, they need us to fall into that, to kind of lose ourselves in this, so we don't really see. It's kind of abstract way to frame it, but I really do feel like that makes sense, that we get trapped in this kind of like middle ground where they're giving you some truth, right? The best lies out there are wrapped in truth. That's usually how it works. So let's talk about like the two-party illusion element of this, because I really respect you in a lot of, for this more than most, but in a lot of ways. But because, in our conversations and just in what I see in your music and what you say online, it's very clear that you're not afraid to call out the duopoly, the lie on both sides of this, and I think that's a really difficult thing for most people, even if they believe it, and then some that just don't care to look at it. But so has that always been something you've noticed? I really just, am I wrong in that? Let me know your opinion on the two-party illusion, and then where you noticed that along the path.
Yeah, for quite some time, I've seen that I've believed that the American electoral system, our democracy, quote unquote, is completely rigged. It is just an illusion of choice. I don't know if it was, probably some of the first elections I was even old enough to vote in, or maybe like Bush versus Kerry. Just seeing like how rigged everything was. Like, you have two guys both they were part of some secret society, right? Skull and Bones, and they just really, behind the media illusion of that they're so different, they really have the same values. They represent the same class of people in our society. They have the same interests. So I've felt like that for a long time. I really think the last president that wasn't completely controlled and co-opted was JFK. And I think that's why they blew his brains out in broad daylight in front of everyone with the cameras rolling, to let you know. Like, they let you know they own these people. Now, people want to continue to believe that there's some hero that that's going to save them, like a Trump or Obama. And all you have to do is cast your ballot every 4 years, and everything's going to be fine. That it's a really nice, convenient thing, right? Because people have lives and people have work, and life's hard enough. Like, what are you going to do? Like, is everybody just going to go start a revolution? Are they going to devote themselves to community activism? Are they going to, when they can just believe the lie and cast their ballot? And it takes all that burden of responsibility off of them. And that's what they're counting on. That's what the ruling class counts on. And that's why they push this illusion to us. But now it's never been so divisive. In the 80s, it was like, we're all in this together. We're against the Russians and against the commies. But now we're at a point where it's like they've pitted Americans against each other, pitted Britons against each other. Everyone in the West is like, sees their neighbor as a potential enemy. And it's so diabolical. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if you, in my opinion, if you vote for Trump, you vote for Harris. I don't think they count your votes. I think it's peak naivete to believe that the people that would orchestrate 9/11, that would murder a sitting president in broad daylight, that would, carry out something like the Oklahoma City bombing and murder children, that would carry out Waco and burn women and children alive, that would drop napalm and Agent Orange on civilian populations in Vietnam. That same type of person and mentality, you think they were going to let you change anything by casting a ballot? That's peak naivete. Um,
I love that now. I mean, it's the same argument I make about other discussions, not to pull the mind away from what we're talking about, but where it's so obvious to me that the very people that are in power and all the rhetoric they have, and then turn around and just suggest that people they otherwise call terrorists, and then they'll allow them to vote about something, or it's certainly possible, but I mean, we should question it. Is the point we're making? And I would even argue, and let me know if you agree with this, that clearly I think we both have hope for that possibility, right? Not say that we're just going to disregard that. Obviously we want that, we hope for that, but we're not naive enough to think just make ourselves believe that that's what's happening, especially when all the evidence clearly shows us otherwise. And it's such a hard pill for some people to swallow, because their whole identity, left and right, has been wrapped up in this simple idea that they just, because they choose, that somehow everything that then happens over 4 years is completely their decision. Like the whole mandate thing right now is whatever the current point is, that was what you all voted for. It's like, I mean, these aren't even things that were discussed in the election process. It's just, it's really frustrating. But, what to right now in like the music industry, that just popped into my head. Is there a slant that you feel in at least in your circles that goes one way or the other, or aware of it all?
oh, I just, in terms of like people being awake to
I
like
guess
that
more so
illusion,
about,
or
no, more so like a political leaning left and right, or maybe those that see through it. I'd love to believe that's the majority, but I don't think that's what it would be.
yeah, I think it's pretty. I mean, definitely the mainstream music industry is still leans very hard towards the modern left view of
Hmm.
things. I mean, there's like drag queens performing at like the CMAs, and the Chappelle Rowans on the mainstream of like, everything is the kind of that leftist agenda, those social and gender ideology and all those things. That's what we're seeing. And I think that also we're seeing that in film too. Like every
Hmm.
film, every TV show now has to be you have to be inundated with this kind of agenda at some point. It preaches to you. You can't
Right.
just go see a Batman movie. Like somewhere in the middle, like Catwoman has to have a monologue about how Bruce Wayne is a privileged white brat who's like the heir to the all the white oppressors of the world. Like what? Like I thought Batman was like trying to save people. No, you got to get preached to.
And,
um
and really quickly, whether or not it's even a valid point or not is irrelevant, because it's about them trying to insert some unnecessary political point that like jars you out of the movie, or like making somebody a lesbian trans partner that has no relevance to the storyline. It's just like, it's so frustrating because it ruins the movie.
Yeah, literally. They'll even take things where like they establish characters, build story arcs for them, and then the fourth or fifth season they completely change. It's like, no, this guy actually isn't in love with that girl. He's gay and he loves this dude, and everything you believed was just a lie to
Right.
somehow because we decided that the agenda and the message is more important. So yeah, getting back to that, I think the mainstream music industry is pushing all those same things, just the
Mm.
same way that all the mainstream news networks and all the other media is. And I think if you look behind the scenes a little bit, you pull back the curtain, there's ESG involved.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason why like Star Wars ratings and all the people aren't buying even some of these music acts. I'm sure they're probably being promoted up with like fake Spotify streams and stuff like that. People aren't necessarily buying it, but it's like they're pushing it anyway. Like you were saying,
It's
a lot of
interesting.
people see through it. They don't want it, but the agenda is still moving forward. And it's like kind of we're not in this like consumer based economy anymore with a lot of these things. It's like it doesn't matter if people necessarily buy it or get tickets to go see that movie. They're still going to keep pushing out,
Yeah.
trans, lesbian, Star Wars or whatever it is, because they're probably getting more money through the ESG funding through
Right.
BlackRock or whatever than they're going to get from people, consumers buying a ticket to go see the movie at the box office.
Totally agree. But doesn't that in and of itself show you that it's not even actually about the principle? Like it's not like I think I know there are people that get wrapped up in like the identity of these. There are people on left and right that really believe the nonsense that's out there. But doesn't that show you or indicate that some of them are just doing it because it benefits them? And that like I often wonder that how much of this is like I make the point about USAID and the woke stuff, this push. I'm of the very clear mind, and I think the evidence proves it, that it's not about the fact that they really cared about pushing pronouns in Zimbabwe. It's about that they wanted that to get the foot in the door for regime change. And there were people wrapped up in it that probably thought they were doing the right thing. But I think that's what it comes down to. It's an agenda. And the same point they make is that you can prove that the current Trump administration is actually still funding circumcision in South Africa and Mali and different places, and that's still happening. I can look it up on USAID, and no one talks about it. It's for me, it's because those narratives still work in those places. So it's about the long-term agenda. And so I wonder if these. Let's put it in the question. Do you think it's possible with what you've seen, how kind of fair weather a lot of these people are, that suddenly if it became in their interest to push right-leaning things, that suddenly that would overtake these industries? Or do you think they're just so ideologically captured that they push back to their detriment? Interesting thought.
Oh yeah. I mean, like people that run like labels and like these big, like, yeah, artist management companies and things like that, entertainment managers. Oh yeah, they would, in film studio heads, whatever they were told to push, whatever the money is telling them to push, that they would push it. That's why like none of this seems organic. It's like it's not organic that Lockheed Martin, who's made weapons of mass destruction since their inception, probably has the blood of millions and millions of civilians on their hands,
including Americans.
Including Americans, that they sponsor floats in the pride parades. Like it's nothing about that is organic. It's like weird. Wild, bro. It's so wild. And it's sad that people can't see through it, that all of a sudden they think that like it's just completely swapped. Because it used to be, the more Christian values and the more conservative values were the predominant culture in our society. And in a lot of ways, I think that benefited the ruling class. And then at some point they realized we're headed towards this cataclysmic kind of monumental change in all of society, with our economy, with modern technology, with AI, with automation, and the old ways aren't going to work anymore. And that's why the Great Reset and these things that they discuss, and the Internet of Bodies and the wearables and trackables, and creating this whole kind of like technocratic future. I think they've decided they got to get rid of all those things that kind of held us together in this kind of moral fabric, whether it was right or wrong. And we're like in this color revolution period where they have to make everything, like, to make people question reality. I mean, we're like literally having arguments about what is a woman and what is a man, and can women like have a locker room without a man with a penis coming into it and sharing the locker room? Like, insanity. Yeah. Like I have a friend in the UK, Louise Distress, who's going to court tomorrow, possibly facing 5 years in prison over speech because she spoke at a women's rights rally in the UK. Like, what? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's where we're at. So yeah, I do think these people they'd push whatever they were paid to push. And yes, there are some true believers within those ranks, but the people at the very top, I think it's just about what's incentivizing it. And we also saw that with COVID. A lot of that was done through incentivizing the local governments, the companies. You want to get these loans, make sure you push all the COVID mandates, push all the protocols. You just kind of follow the money, and you kind of see how it's being pushed.
Yeah. Well, two thoughts sent to my mind on that is, first, I'm much more of the mind these days that I think more and more people are actually seeing through it. And I think it's been happening for a while, but what we're painting there, I think, has always been the ploy, and it's worked for a long time. But I'm of the mind that today more and more people are actually seeing through a lot of what we're talking about, and that's why it's getting more intense. At the same time, talking about Israel's playing a very real factor in all this, in my opinion, and very clearly when you're talking about dividing, and it seems like this is to the interest of something other than the U.S. interest. And so it's worth considering that. And on the points of that and the two-party illusion, we'll talk about this. This was a clip coming out of Massey, which is generally just the point of Massey. We can discuss how I think him and Trump and Iran and Israel, we're seeing like a massive fracture through what appeared to be one of the most like lockstep, the MAGA movement or the MAHA, or, conservatives and Trump. And so he's just simply, it's the post here says AIPAC has transitioned to do confrontational lobbying group, where if you don't basically talk about AIPAC, I just want to use this to trigger my thought about Massey. So what are your thoughts on how that's all affecting everything? The idea of AIPAC and funding and Israel and what just happened with Iran, and like Tucker and Candace kind of like fracturing away from that. It's just a broad conversation. Like, what do you have any thoughts on where that's going? And if maybe we are finally breaking away from this two-party illusion in a real sense?
I think there's people in the political system, and Thomas Massey might be one of them, that isn't completely controlled. There's people I think people get into that because they want to create real change, and because they have core values and beliefs, and they want to do good. And so he might genuinely be one of those people. He seems like it, but who knows?
Hope so.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people are seeing through the two-party illusion. There's still a lot of people stuck in the the fights of that, the culture war of that. I'd like to be optimistic, and I like to think that people will kind of get back to real life and see the things that more of what we have in common instead of what
Right.
we have, creating this division between us. But yeah, I'm just not really sure. In the greater sense, like with Israel and global politics, I kind of feel like in a lot of ways there's already like the one world government is already here.
I
I think
agree.
we saw that with COVID. All of these countries fell in lockstep with this insane protocol, this insane reaction to what was we were told was a respiratory virus. It had never been done before, and the fact that every country followed suit, it followed China's lead, is insane to me. And you could look
Yep.
back and find like the white pager reports from the Rockefeller Foundation of talking about scenarios for the future and the lockstep plan, and it's like
Right.
literally like a blueprint for it. But like they all did it, and the fact that they all did, and there was really kind of nowhere where you could escape in the Western world, at least. Uh, it showed to me like these there with just a few outliers, there already is this kind of global government. Our
Agree.
national like sovereignty, I think in a lot of ways is an illusion. I mean, we do. I am very fortunate that we're in America. We still have freedom of speech here. Like I was talking about, my friend is facing criminal charges for speech in the UK. We have the First Amendment still, and we have to keep fighting and keeping those rights alive. So, but in a lot of ways, I do think that the global governance, at least the kind of the foundation of it, has already been erected and is here.
Yeah. I completely agree. Actually, I see it as, and there's always nuance and there's always different aspects of this, but as a kind of a Zionist technocrat globalist kind of blob, and I think it's not all just the same, it's interwoven, but it's become kind of the same ultimate outcome. That's how I'm seeing a lot of this, and we can see which, and on a side note, we mentioned things like InfoWars, the people in the past that have at least feigned to call out globalism and the North American Union and all these different things. And now suddenly I've never in my lifetime seen a more obvious example of them start to come to pass. And it's like, can't point in another direction fast enough. I think that's worth our time to consider why that would be happening. Like the North American Union with Greenland and Mexico and Canada. And it's exactly what we've been told for such a long time, And so I see that all as kind of one thing, or at the very least that they all see an interest in aligning for those things. Like you mentioned with lockstep, that I don't think for one second that China and Russia we're completely in line with exactly what everybody else wants, but they all are when it comes to controlling our lives. And that's what people are always trying to point out, I think, is that from, these governments will work together even as adversaries if it gives them one up on controlling the peoples of their countries. That's how I see all governments, And so they were like, yeah, we'll go in lockstep insofar as we can use all the tools you're building, but we're not going to just give in to our sovereignty for you versus this one agenda. I mean, that's how I kind of see it. So I very much agree with you on that. And I think the issue right now is that Israel is playing this oversized role in a lot of things. And that's kind of one of these friction factors of what people are seeing, that they're letting them drive this outcome, the Greater Israel Project, the occupying different countries, and genocide and killing people. And it's causing people to be very uncomfortable. And that's fracturing this down the middle, which is where I think technocracy comes into play. So what do you think about that overlap and like where, technocracy and the overlap of Zionism? You have any thoughts on that?
I don't really. I do think that like the same way that I feel like we're in the throes of this color revolution culturally here in the Western world. I think on the global political side, there needs to be all this kind of insane strife, because I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to destroy all the old ways and kind of erect this great reset, this new
Mm-hmm.
global order, under this just technocratic kind of system where people are living on getting UBI, and people are just kind of, so many jobs are going to disappear just in the next few years. They already are. So how there's going to be just mass civil unrest, but so they're kind of, it's like a controlled demolition of the old system.
But
in the
that's kind of
old
my
ways.
point is
Yeah.
that what I'm thinking is this from Israel's perspective, and this is actually a very clear Zionist mindset. Even like people like Huckabee and Hegseth they consider themselves biblical Zionists, and they're in the current administration where they actually have a mindset. And Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, leadership in Israel, they promote, these are public discussions that the West needs to essentially collapse for the end times to come on. And so my point, you wonder if whether you believe out that out there or not, that they do, and that might drive them to take the kind of actions we're seeing through weaponized immigration, through the left-right divide, and like what's happening. That's kind of where we're going with it, is a general sentiment about whether these globalist kind of technocratic agendas are kind of leading to the demise of this country, and whether our leaders might be aware of that or not be smart enough to see it. It's a broad thought, but I just think that we're seeing a lot of chaos right now in this country.
Yeah, no, I think it's all intentional. I think we are seeing like a controlled demolition of the West and of Western values for a reason, so that these the technocrats and the parasite class can create this new system that they think is going to be the one that's beneficial to them, because the technological train is not stopping. It's just advancing at such an incredible rate. I think the abilities that AI has, we've just seen the tip of the iceberg of what they've shown us. But with automation, and I mean, there's a lot of job sectors just going completely destroyed and eliminated. And so there's a whole new economy that they're kind of creating, and a new order of things. But yeah, I just, there's a lot of, I don't really think that it's like Israel controlling America. I think these people have had I think Israel in a lot of ways was funded by Americans, by the American government, as to have an ally in that region. I mean, it's the number one recipient of our foreign aid for a reason. We could have this sympathetic ally to our military and strategic and interests. And that's why so I don't think it's necessarily Israel controlling America. I think in a lot of ways it was started, in in the 50s or 60s, 40s, 50s, by a lot of people, big players in the American government, to fund that and make that happen. But I don't think there's a lot of like anti-Jewish sentiment out there, and there's a lot of that. I just want to. And I just think that that's also another psyop where it's another form of division, is kind of othering people, saying these people are the cause of it.
Zionist is what I'm talking about. Just to clarify that for those that might be new to the show, for you watch, and the point being that what I and to actually what you're saying is whether that there's plenty of people that feel that the reverse of that, that maybe the U.S. is like dictating what Israel does, and that's just as possible. People consider the different opinions, but what I find interesting is whether or not who's controlling one or the other, that whether or not there are radical elements in any government that might try to undermine or destroy another government. We all know that's possible. So that's more what I'm getting at. But to your point of the Zionist point, let's clarify very clearly that, as always, what I'm discussing is the Zionist ideology. And whether you agree with me or not, there are a lot of you out there listening, not yes, or you here, but the Zionist. There's a lot of Orthodox Jewish communities in the world that are in Israel. In fact, they get beat up by the IDF every day, who are out there chanting Zionism does not represent Jews. And so it's a multifaceted conversation. I hope everybody will take the time to research it. But the point is about political manipulation, not Jews or Christians or Muslims, but how they manipulate all of those things. Just to make that clear for those that you were kind of pointing to right there. And that's important. Very important to know that, because it is one of the largest manipulations to convince people that it's all Jewish people out there doing everything, which is not true.
Yeah, and I think anything when you have a system where you or a fundamentalist belief system that tells you your destiny is to have this land or have this right over other people, and I think that's always a recipe for horrible things. We saw it in the beginning of America with Manifest Destiny, where it was this concept of we need to just kind of move westward. It's our destiny to take over this land from the people that had already lived here, and that caused incredible bloodshed and suffering and genocide here in America. So I just think when you have this concept of like we are owed this by God, and anything that stands in our way must be taken out by any means necessary, it's just
dangerous.
That's how we, yeah, it's really dangerous. And that's how we see these horrible atrocities being carried out. And
Right.
that's what these radical fundamentalist beliefs, they propagate.
Yep. And that shouldn't be a contentious thing to point out. I mean, it's self-evident today, and it's not about one group or one group. It's just anybody in any religion with any skin color that does something like that. It's so exhausting that we have to do that. But today, that's part of the propaganda, the manipulations to get people to ignore the obvious because it might be, you might secretly be a racist or whatever it's infuriating. But it's so important that we start to call these things out, like we said in the beginning. That we cross the lines, that we just engage with what our principles, our integrity, what we believe is true. It's just so very important. Well, let's end with the part we kind of touched on to begin with, which is the old technocratic side of this. We kind of overlapped that with the last part, but we mentioned this talking about the wearable thing. This is kind of one of these things going around yesterday, today, where RFK Jr., I mean, not even get into the other 75 things we could point out that seem to be not just challenging the diametric opposite of what was promised, whether a Stargate mRNA platform or CRISPR pig meat or it's just MR injections. But so the idea here is wearables. And I mean, I'll just point out at the beginning, if this was Fauci saying this exactly the same way under Biden's administration, they would be marching through the streets, and rightly so. We should be concerned about this either way. But that's the first point to make, is that stark hypocrisy about not caring about it now from the right. But what are your thoughts on wearables? And do you find that to be a concern, and where this can go in the future?
Oh yeah, I think we should definitely be concerned. I think that is the great reset stuff. These are the things that Klaus Schwab and Yuval Noah Harari were talking about. The Internet of Bodies. Everybody wears a wearable thing that can be tracked and traced, and all our biometrics are being sent to the authorities at all times. And that's how we can keep society safe. Yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, it's something out of like a Philip K. Dick, dystopian future. Yeah, we should push back on it at every turn, regardless of who it's coming from. And I think there's a reason it's coming from RFK Jr., this guy that has been such a, kind of a voice for vaccine safety, a prominent voice against a lot of the COVID nonsense over the last 5 years. My belief, I can't prove it, but I think they got to this guy, or maybe he was always controlled on some level, but he seemed genuine. And I just feel like they control him. I mean, literally, they killed his father. In my opinion, these same kind of factions, maybe not the same these same people are alive, but the same kind of mentality of people that run things behind the show. I believe behind the curtain, they're the people that killed Robert Kennedy. They're the people that killed his uncle JFK. So I think they don't have to really, prove their point to him of what they're capable of doing. So I think he's controlled, and I think people have to stop outsourcing their sovereignty or their control or their power to a political figure. Don't give it to RFK. Don't give it to Trump. Don't give it to Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom. You got to just you find that within yourself. We're going to create real change by ourselves and with our community and with real people in real life, not through somebody on a screen or somebody that we're casting a vote for. Right. This call to personality and all the identity. We just got to get away from all that.
Yeah. Woke left, woke right. Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I definitely think that's the problem, is that people want to believe, and I get it. And we all get it. We all want somebody to be the one that's going to change everything. But I would argue that the person that would actually embody that would tell you never to do that. Like the idea is even the person that is that, couldn't they still be fooled? Couldn't they still make a mistake? Yeah, obviously, so we should not be blindly leaning into any person, all these, partisans out there going, I have full faith and trust in Donald Trump. It's like, that's an embarrassing thing to say right now in any context, left or right. That's not how that works. We're supposed to be holding their feet to the fire, especially when they're who you believe they are. It's frustrating, but this goes in a very dangerous direction with all this. The wearables, we've all been calling this out for so long, and I don't know if you saw this, Detachment 201, which I just called technocracy in uniform, but literally OpenAI, Meta, and Palantir, they've got people, their CTOs becoming actual lieutenant colonels in the military. That just happened. I mean, that's insane. I mean, that's real power. They obviously already have real power, but this is a military level. I mean, this is technocracy. This is where all this goes. And I'm going to end with a clip about the overwrapping, kind of wearable direction, coming back to COVID-19 time. And I'll point out that Mary Tally Bowden, MD, says our next Surgeon General, Casey Means, as a wearables company. What do you know? So, just give me your thoughts on this before we wrap in general. And if you haven't, seen that 201 thing, like where you see all this is going, we've been calling it out. We've been calling it out. Everyone's been calling it out. And here we are,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, they would, it just gets back to what we've been saying. And they want to create this, this dystopian panopticon of control the system of constant surveillance. We're already halfway there with all of our phones are just these spying devices that we keep on ourselves all the time. And then we're encouraged to have this whole online identity and persona in life where we share all of our intimate moments and try to engage with people on there for connection, when all that is analyzed and viewed, and probably, that all that data is collected, and there's probably some AI thing that just has files on each and every one of us, especially those of us that it deems problematic.
Look up digital twins out there, guys. It's happening right now. Like legitimately mapping out what you may do tomorrow using every data point you've ever put on the internet on some Sim City version in the DoD. That's real stuff.
That's wild. I haven't heard about that. No.
Well, the bottom line is, and to what degree is the real question, but that there are models that anybody can do. I mean, if you can do on scraping Twitter if you wanted to, but the idea being that if you have access to it, and think of what Doge and Palantir just did with all the databases, that they essentially can input that data into an AI kind of algorithmic thing and basically output, like a SimCity version of you. So there's an Owen walking around, you know what I mean? Or a Gene walking around and basically doing what the computer thinks you would be doing. And then every moment, what we said just now, what you posted on Twitter today, then gets added to it and updates. And, the point being, the argument is, and I've seen studies on this, that they can predict what you may do next year or Tuesday at 3 p.m., whatever it is, to a high percentage. And the more the data gets put in, and then this is before what Palantir just did, that's scooping up of everything we've ever known. And so that's, and the question is, what is that being used for? Is this the real time, pre-crime thing Whitney and I've talked about? It's just, that's a scary thing, but it's very real.
And they sell it just on convenience. They can even market that, right? Would it be enticing for so many people to be like, well, I don't have to worry about doing my social media. I can just have my digital twin do it.
Yes, see, that's a whole different angle. That's like Elon and the rest of them starting to use these bots that are like their AI version that are out there doing things for them. It's there's so many angles to this that this kind of, honestly, this stuff keeps me up at night. This is the stuff that terrifies me.
Maybe it'll all come all full circle, so we can all just stop doing any of this stuff. We just have digital twins that just do it, that are all AIs, and we just go back to living real life. We're planting crops and having picnics and having music festivals and.
That's a nice way to look at it. WALL-E, the movie WALL-E. Have you seen that? That's the joke they make about everyone in the chairs, the big fat Americans all driving around. It's that's where they would want you to go with that ploy. But yeah, if we could go Derek's vision, exit and build while, but even still, I know you're being half joking, but it's the idea of being allowed to do that. But then how do they hack into your digital twin and make you say whatever they want you to say? But, any way that gets us back to some level of not, being consumed by all of this, that would be nice. But yeah, it's a terrifying.
I think that's what it is. Everybody needs to step away from the screens, every day. Take some time, get away from it. Take days if you can, and just connect with people in the real world. I mean, I encounter people every day here in Nashville that I know we're so opposite, and we're completely on different sides of issues. But we get along. I know trans people. I know people that call themselves non-binary, and a lot of their way of life I don't agree with. But we get along. People are polite in regular society. It's on all this division is being pushed through social media and Reddit, and things like that, where this constant division, constant partisanship, turning people against each other. People in real life find it really hard to cancel and be horrible and vile to you when they can actually see the effect of that. People, it will affect people's empathy. But living this life through screens and on this digital medium, it's eroding our empathy. That's what allows the social engineers to pit us against each other. We need to get back into the real world, really connecting with people regardless of our differences. And in that, I think, is where we can find optimism and hope for the future. And I do, I follow some of Derek's work, and I think Derek Brose's work and the exit and build. I think that is a great way to, to create, not be dependent upon these things and not look for any savior in a politician or an elected official. Just we're going to create the future that we want by ourselves. And it all starts right now with like the community that you can foster and create around you.
Absolutely. And as you said before, it really comes down to, you can have to agree with people's choices. You can vehemently disagree, but you can respect that it's their choice. That's really what it comes down to. And this idea that we've turned it into, that your choice like offends me, or like that it's just, that's like the woke element from both sides of the paradigm. It's really about, being able to converse about it. Maybe you guys can talk about it later, but allowing it to be their choice. I respect that even if I disagree. It's wild that we ever got away from that, man. But really enjoyed the conversation today. We should do this again. Before I play the quick clip about the wearables, then we end with your music video. Anything else you want to leave us with? Upcoming events, upcoming shows, anything you want to leave before we leave today?
Yeah. If you're in Georgia, we're taking part in our favorite annual benefit concert called 500 Songs for Kids that
Nice.
Takes place this Friday in East Atlanta. It's called the Earl. So come out and support that. We're going to be doing one of my favorite songs, Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division. And then on the 4th of July, be back in Nashville playing at the Underdog with our friends, The Absurd, and some other great bands.
Nice.
So if you don't have plans for the 4th, come party with us. It should be really fun. And yeah, just follow my work on faithlesstown.com and at faithlesstown on all the social media platforms, all that stuff.
Outstanding, brother. Yeah, we'll include these in the show notes down below for everyone to check out. Make sure you follow them. Make sure you support their work. They're really doing amazing work, very talented. And as we shown today, they, maintain principles, which is wild today in the world that we're in. So thank you for being here today, brother. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Puis, au bout de ça, on parle de puces qu'on pourra s'implanter. Ce sera quand ça?
Certainement dans les 10 années à venir. Et d'abord, on va les implanter dans nos vêtements, c'est-à-dire wearables, comme on le dit. Et après, on pourrait s'imaginer qu'on les implante dans nos cerveaux ou dans nos topos. Et à la fin, peut-être il y a une communication directe entre notre cerveau et le monde digital. Ce que nous voyons, c'est une sorte de fusion du monde physique, digital et biologique.
We think that wearables are a key to the MAHA agenda, making America healthy again. And we are going to, my vision is that every American is wearing a wearable within 4 years.
We're no night coming, 'cause we're no longer sleeping. We're gonna stand together.